might go ahead and get started on just doing some intros. I know that most of our applicants have been on quite a few of these uh, workshops together already, so have heard the titles of folks' projects, but we'll just get started for Eric's sake. So today presenting to you all is Eric Guzik. As you can see, he's the clinical professor of entrepreneurship here at the University of Montana, and he's going to talk with us all about our project pitch sessions, which will be, as you all know, in just a few short weeks. Again, I'm Leidy Wagner. I'm the operations manager for Rocky Mountain Reach, and we've also got Caroline on the call as well. And you both have seen our faces quite a few times. So why don't we all just go around and say your name and your university and the name of your project, and we'll start with you, Jennifer.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm Jennifer Thomas. I'm from the University of Wyoming, and I cannot remember my project title, but it's basically a digital technology for the National Diabetes Prevention Program.
Perfect. Thank you. Noah, do you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, sure. I accidentally turned off my camera and not unmuted myself. My name is Noah. I work with Dr. Julia Tinker. I'm a graduate student. I work with Dr. Julia Tinker at Boise State University, and we're developing a enterotoxin-based oral salmonella vaccine.
Great. Thank you. And Brent, would you like to introduce yourself to Eric?
Hi, my name's Brent Lida. I am with a startup company that was registered in December called Big Sky Biolabs. It's myself and one other, both former graduates from the University of Montana. We are developing inhibitors of solute carriers that are implicated in cancer. So this project we're working towards is a anti-cancer agents.
Great. And it looks like Greg, who is also on your project. Is that right, Brent? He just joined.
That's correct. Yeah. Greg Leary and myself. Yes.
Great. All right. Welcome, everyone. Thank you again. Greg, I know Brent just introduced your project, but do you want to introduce yourself to Eric here, our presenter of the day? Well, that's all right. We will just jump right in. Eric, I will turn it over to you. And just a reminder, you can put any questions that you might have in the chat or in the Q&A, and I can read them on screen, or feel free to use the hand raise function as well if you'd like to ask your question directly. We do have a nice intimate group today, so hopefully we can have some good discussion and get some great feedback from Eric. And I will turn it over to you.
Well, thank you, Lydia. I appreciate that. And thank you, everyone, for introducing yourselves. And I do want to give a little bit of my background. I am a clinical professor at UM. And the clinical part means I do teach, I do a little bit of research on campus, but I also have one foot in the professional world. So I've been involved with startups for about 20 years, still involved with one now. So the point of that professorship is having not just the theoretical background in entrepreneurship, but actually doing work within that community. So a little bit of my background, my degree is in economics. I've been focusing on entrepreneurship since about 2000 and launched my first product in the year 2000. And you'll note here, did not launch my first company until 2010. And that's an important distinction that we often miss in entrepreneurship. You're actually building two things as a founder and an entrepreneur. You're building a product or a solution, but you're also building a company. So it's a really kind of exciting type of creativity where you're building a solution, but you're also building a mechanism by which to share that with that end user. So the latest startup I've been involved with, I'm a founder of Patient One. This is a VC-backed company that we launched in 2016 here in Missoula. And that funding round was led by Dundee Capital. and Rise of the Rest Revolution Fund. Rise of the Rest is a national VC group led by Steve Case. He was the founder of AOL, and they're looking for investment opportunities in areas that other VCs may have missed, and that's pretty much anywhere inside Middle America, so inside the two coasts. I like to say we've been incredibly successful, and I've been particularly successful making every mistake you can make in the startup world. And that's part of what I'd like to share today. Some of the things to be aware of when you're developing your pitch and your presentation. I think with patient one, we were particularly creative. We were developing mistakes that I don't think anybody else has thought of before. So we took that to the extreme. You will hear quite often in entrepreneurship and startups, failure is part of the process. That's absolutely true. So there's really no way around making mistakes. It's a learning process. It is a process of entrepreneurship. But I think if we can be aware of some of the mistakes that you may be put in front of, we'll have a better chance of stepping around those in the future. So beginning with just a basic question, what is your pitch? You're selling your solution to someone. And there are two main types I'd like to look at today. And you're probably aware of these, but I do want to go through them just a bit. The elevator pitch and then your pitch deck and presentation. So when you're presenting your idea, your solution, these are two kind of formats that you'll often use. And even if you're not using one of these two, you'll probably be able to take elements from one of these two or both and able to develop a presentation that's going to be effective and convince some group, some organization, some end audience that you have a solution that's worth pursuing or funding. So I do want to go through just a basic overview of each of these types of presentations and pitches and begin with the elevator pitch. And you may be aware of this, you may have used this in the past, but this is meant to be very short. And the reason why it's called an elevator pitch, it should take the amount of time that an elevator takes to get from ground floor to the top floor, so around 60 seconds. So the point of the elevator pitch is to be very short and sweet, very concise. So you want to cover the essentials within your proposed business or your plan. And it has a purpose. So when we look at the pitch and presentation, always have a purpose in mind. What is your goal of giving this pitch? What is the end objective that you're trying to reach? So it may be moving to the next step of your strategy, of your plan. It could be getting funding. It could be adding a co-founder. It could be giving a demo or trying to close a sale in the future. So whatever you give that pitch, have that goal in mind. And then most importantly, does not actually have to be given in an elevator. So what you're doing is conveying that solution in trying to get support for that next step that you're moving toward as part of your strategy. In terms of a basic format and template, here is one way to think about what to include in your pitch. Again, it's meant to be short. These are the basic elements that are part of any presentation, beginning with yourself and then your company. So begin by introducing who you are, what your company is, what they do. Very important then to move to the problem. And you can be creative at how you include these different elements and components of your pitch, but that problem is a good way to introduce your audience to that issue that you're trying to solve and how your solution is solving that problem. So begin to describe that problem, that challenge that you're facing, and how your solution is going to respond to that problem. One reason why this is such an effective way to begin your pitch, you're creating a little bit of anxiety or tension in the mind of your audience. So if it's a problem, if it's a challenge, and it begins to resonate and connect with your audience, they're going to want that problem resolved. So you're hooking them in a way, you're bringing them in, and they become very engaged in trying to figure out how you're going to solve that issue. So problem and then solution, you can describe your product a little bit, how it's going to solve your identified problem. And then the other really important part of your elevator pitch is what differentiates your solution and your team. So what makes you a little bit different? It could be you're better than the competition. Maybe you have something that's technology that hasn't been introduced in the market. Maybe you're building something a little bit faster. Maybe it's less expensive. So highlight what sets your business apart from your competitors. So this is your differentiation. Often people use the term secret sauce, but this is what is going to distinguish you within your market. If you have this information and you have time, also include a little bit of detail about your target market. Who is that customer you're serving? How large is that market? Again, we only have 60 seconds. If you don't have that information, that's not key to include. But the bold points here under elevator pitch, these are the main points you'd like to include and should include within your elevator pitch to your audience. If you have any traction, that includes even a minimal viable product. It could be a demo. If you have any test users, if you have a beta program, any evidence of traction. So that's movement beyond the idea phase. Any evidence you have, you've taken something and you pushed it past that initial idea, that's entirely appropriate to include within your elevator pitch. And then finally, I've also bolded here that ask or the call to action. What is it that you'd like to get out of that conversation you're having with your audience? So it could be maybe an actual demo. It may be a demonstration. It could be where you're making a longer pitch. So giving your presentation with your full deck. So you're trying to get to that next step as part of your strategy. If you're looking for a sale, if you're looking for funding, that might be your ask. So these are the basic components and the basic format within that elevator pitch. If you can get these different elements within that 60 seconds, and we say 60 seconds, could be up to 90 seconds. There is a show on one of the very esoteric cable networks. It's the Cheddar Network, it's called, and they actually call their show Elevator Pitch, Entrepreneur Elevator Pitch. They give their contestants 60 seconds at the bottom of the building. They get in the elevator, they ride the elevator up. There's a clock running, so they get 60 seconds. Everything is being videoed. And then there are 4 VCs at the top level. In that 60 seconds, if the VCs like what they've heard, they open the doors and they get to hear the full presentation. If not, they keep the doors shut and they send the presenters back to the bottom floor. So a little bit of tough love there, but this would be the idea. In 60 seconds, can you convey enough information to get that audience interested to learn a little bit more and want them to learn a little bit more about your solution? Okay, here's a quick example. I will share this deck. Feel free to use this. But here is the introduction. So my name is, I'm the CEO of, and this company's developed innovative eco-friendly alternative to single-use plastics. Okay, so that is the problem. Plastic pollution, global crisis, causes significant harm to environment and marine life. Okay, so problem. So we've introduced ourselves and the company, we've laid out the problem area, and now we move to our solution. Our solution is, okay, you include your product name, describe that solution a little bit, and then we can move down to any traction that you might have. So if you might have a patent, if you have IP, if you have users, you might include that as part of your pitch. Our patented production process sets us apart from other alternatives. So there's your differentiation. So now we're distinguishing how you're different than alternatives in the market. We're being very clear about what sets you apart. And before we go on, I do want to mention, since we are using an example of a patent, please do be very clear if you have a patent that you've been issued a patent by the USPTO. If you have not been issued a patent, you can say patent pending if you have provisional application for patent in process. And I know you've covered some of the IP issues in entrepreneurship, but this is one of those gray areas that we want to be very clear about. If we have a patent, we want to share that. If not, and we have a provisional application for a patent in process, we can say patent pending. Otherwise, you might just say we are now pursuing a patent process. So that term, patented production process, that does mean we've been issued a patent by the USPTO. And then we can move to market a little bit. We're targeting businesses, the food and beverage industry, so on and so forth. Any other evidence of traction we can include. And then finally, you can see last sentence is the ask. We're currently seeking investment to scale our production capabilities, or you might be seeking investment to launch your initial research. Okay, whatever that ask is, whatever it is that you want to fund, you might include that as your final sentence within that elevator pitch. Okay, so that's just a basic template of your elevator pitch. Again, you can be creative in how you use these different elements to create that pitch, but this would be an example of how you're pitching your idea when you really don't have much time to get that interest from your end audience. So if you're just meeting someone, if you have 60 seconds, maybe 3 minutes, you haven't really scheduled a full presentation, this would be a way for you to get additional time and interest and secure that interest with that audience. Okay, so I'm going to move next to the actual presentation and look at what you might include in a presentation deck. But let me stop here and see if there are any questions about the elevator pitch. Okay, good. Feel free to add any questions within the chat box or send me questions later. Happy to answer those at a later date. Okay, what I'd like to do next is move into maybe a more official type of presentation. And this would include a pitch deck and a presentation that you might give to, let's say, an audience that's already aware of your ideas. So this may be more aligned with some of the presentations you'll be expected to give within this program. I'm going to give you a few examples of what investors would like to see and what usually is recommended when you create a presentation and deck for investors. Now, when I say investors, an investor might be a venture capitalist, it could be an angel investor, but it could also be a funding group, a funding organization. So everything that we cover here, you're going to see expands on the elevator pitch, but it's also appropriate for whatever type of support you're trying to gain for your idea. Okay, so there are three basic rules that need to be followed as you create your presentation and pitch deck. Number one, the ideal length of a deck and presentation is usually between 8 and 12 slides. Now, that's just a consideration for, kind of the general length. If you'd like to include more slides that get into your product a little bit, that's fine, but there are 8 to 12 slides that usually form the core of your presentation. I'll go through these in a moment. The second rule is called the 10-20-30 rule. And this was a rule developed by Guy Kawasaki, kind of well known within the entrepreneurship community, the 10-20-30 rule. So 10 has to do with number of slides. So 10 slides, 20 means the length in terms of time. So no longer than 20 minutes, even 20 minutes now is getting a little bit long. 10 minutes is kind of the amount of time you should expect to give, unless you're given a directive by that group that they would like to take 20 minutes to kind of hear your pitch. And then 30 stands for the size of the font that you should use within your presentation deck. So 30-point font is very large. The reason why that's included, why Guy Kawasaki included the 30, the point here is put very little text into your presentation and deck. So verbally, you're going to communicate your problem, your solution, any traction, market, all that good stuff, which I'll get into in a moment. In terms of the text, there should not really be a significant amount of text in your deck. Try to make this as visual as possible. And it's easy for us as professors to say this because we don't follow this rule ourselves, right? We're notorious for putting an incredible amount of text into our slides, but in terms of presenting to an audience, especially groups who want to know more about your idea, about your team, about your market, the more visual you can be, the better. And then finally, the golden rule of everything you do with a business and startup, try to make this as simple as possible. So you don't need 30 slides, 8 to 12. You don't need to spend an hour, 20 minutes. That is fine. And then the size of the font, again, indicates that you should try to make this as visual as possible. There is a link here to Guy Kawasaki's presentation deck. And I'll share this. You'll be able to click that just to give you a template if you'd like to use it. It's a very standard template. I'm going to give you the layout in a moment here, but if you'd like to use that in Canva, you'll be able to copy it and then build off of that. I should mention it's a very dark theme, almost too dark, I think, but it will give you a sense of the types of slides to include within your presentation. Okay, now before I go on, because I do want to dig into actually what to put into your deck, here is a nice way to think about what most organizations and investors and others would like to see within your presentation. So this is a table. It's showing you 500 startups. They're an accelerator in Silicon Valley. There's Guy Kawasaki with his 10 slides. Sequoia Capital, they're a venture capital group out of California. And then a few others. So Crowdfunder, Next Few Ventures, many different groups here. And what we're going to do here is just look at the commonalities between these different groups and what their expectations are. And the reason why I'm sharing this, it's going to give us a way to understand kind of the essential information included within your presentation. And then I do want to end today by looking at a pitch deck from a company that went through this process. They were able to raise quite a bit of funding for their idea, and that's Airbnb. And I understand that's getting outside of our area of interest here in biotech and bioscience, but I think we're all familiar with Airbnb. So it's a nice way for us to understand how they're following this format. And it's kind of a famous example used in the startup world. So you can see here, problem, solution, business model, competition. Those are the common elements we see among all of these different groups. And if we lay this out, here are the slides that you should consider including within your deck and presentation. Now, as I go through this, remember, it's really up to you what you'd like to include within your presentation. This is a tried and true method. These are the elements that many groups expect you to speak to as you present your idea. And one thing that I'm going to get into in a moment, this is going to help us understand some of the mistakes that we often make as we begin to navigate this very weird world of entrepreneurship and startups. So let me just go through the slides, and then I am going to go through these one by one and kind of look at the do's and don'ts as you develop your presentation and deck. Okay, so just bear with me. I'm just going to go through these slides here that are part of the presentation. Just like in your elevator pitch, begin with you and the name of your company. Then we're going to move into problem once again. Now, if you do not want to call it problem, you want to call it opportunity or unmet need, that's fine, right? So the common name often given is that concept of problem. It's the unresolved situation that you're reacting to as an entrepreneur or a founder or someone who is, offering a solution. Next slide is your solution and your unique selling proposition. That's your differentiator, remember. If you want to break those two out, that's fine too. I will also mention if you want to develop your solution a little bit more and maybe give some examples of what your product looks like or how it acts or some visuals of that solution, that's entirely appropriate. One thing I do want to mention though, and I'm going to show this in an upcoming slide, one of the traps that we often fall into as founders and entrepreneurs, we spend too much time on the solution in our product. So we do want to be aware of that challenge that we face in entrepreneurship. I will also tell you, VCs and those who are investors, they're not particularly interested in the idea itself, believe it or not. They're very interested in you and your team, and they're interested in the market opportunity. Now, they do want to know how you're different. They want to hear a solution that's a little bit different than what other competitors are offering in the market, but they're not as interested in the solution as we as founders are usually. Okay, we're very interested in the product that we're developing. We're super motivated to develop that product. We're excited about it. Keep in mind that those who want to invest in you, they're more interested in you and your team, and they're more interested in the market potential in your idea. Now, when I say market potential, keep in mind, my background's economics. Market means supply and demand. That means not just your product, it means the group that's going to benefit from your product. That's demand. So demand is that idea of satisfaction, utility, value. Who is going to get value out of your product? Why? And why is it important for you to launch this solution? Okay, that's why investors are so interested in market. They want to make sure that someone is going to benefit from your idea if they support it and this business launches and it grows in the future. Okay, now there's one slide here that was not bolded within the previous table, but I do want to mention. So after you talk a little bit about business model and go-to-market, you can also talk about market size. The why now slide is becoming increasingly important within the investment community. And that's because timing really is a very important consideration. Why is it that your solution is so appropriate right now? Are you at the beginning of a trend? Are we beginning to see new technology that solves a problem in a new way? So spend a little bit of time thinking about why now is a perfect time for your team to go ahead and build a solution to a problem you've laid out. Okay, next slide is competition. Begin to spend a little bit of time talking about your space and market and who your competitors are. The next slide, as I mentioned, extremely important for investment groups and others who want to support you and your idea. What is it about you and your team that makes you such a compelling group to fund? Very important slide. This may be the most important factor that investors are looking for. They want to know more about you. They want to know about your background. They want to know about your success. They want to know about your team. Now, you'll notice here that word is team. Right now, if we just talk about VCs and investors, they do want to see a team. That just keep that in mind. As you begin to develop your idea, and if you go forward and you look for funding in the future, it's very challenging for individuals to get funding now if they don't have co-founders and a team that's going to support this idea. And that's just the way investors are thinking from their experience. It's just so challenging for one individual to be successful within the startup world. VCs now, if they do not see at least a CEO and a CTO, so someone on kind of the business side, someone on the technology product side, they become a little bit anxious about whether or not that individual, if there's no team, will be able to pull off that idea successfully. Okay, again, any traction, could be testimonials, any awards that you've received, that would be an appropriate slide. And then again, try to end with your fundraising, maybe your goals or the ask that you have. And I'll show you an example of this in a second. Okay, so those are 10 slides. You'll see I bolded here the core slides that should be in your presentation. Problem, solution. So problem would be the unmet need. Solution would be your value proposition. How are you creating something useful for someone within the market? Then market size, if you have that information, but you'll see again, that's not something that all groups require within a deck. Usually business model, go-to-market, that would include marketing. I'll get into that in a moment. If you have questions about what that should include, let me know. Why now? Competition team. Again, if you have traction, include that. If not, that's not a slide that all groups ask for. And then finally, your fundraising and ask. Okay, let me go through the do's and don'ts. Okay, I'm going to call these essentials, and I'll be a little bit provocative here and say, I think you have to do this. These are things you really have to convey effectively within your presentation. First, do. You have to discuss the need and market potential. How is it that you're responding to an unmet need? That gets to value. Now, value is one of those words in economics that has a very weird meaning. Often we think of value in terms of money. Turns out in economics, value means something very different. Value means satisfaction and utility. How is it that someone's going to benefit from your idea? We have to discuss that need, and that then will support market potential. If you're satisfying a need and people are going to use your idea and potentially pay for it, then that is the base for market potential. So yes, we're going to get into financials. Yes, as you develop your deck, you're going to get into financial modeling. But the biggest thing that groups want to hear when they think about your idea, what need is it satisfying, what promise it's solving, and what value is it creating in terms of usefulness and satisfaction for that end user. Okay, second, must. How are you different? This, again, is your differentiation. It's your unique selling proposition. How are you doing things just a little bit differently than the competition? It doesn't have to be significantly different, right? So I'm very interested in creativity. I've studied creativity most of my adult life. Often we think about creativity as originality. It doesn't have to be completely original. So creativity, if we break it down, as long as we're doing something a little bit different, and we're trying to use that difference to satisfy a market need, that is what we have to convey within that presentation. Otherwise, we're just imitating others, which may be fine, but then we're getting a little bit away from entrepreneurship and kind of the goals that most startups have to satisfy a need in a significant way. And one final point before I move on from how you're different, we often use the term innovation in economics and entrepreneurship. Innovation, for that to have meaning, I think, it means that your idea has to be adopted by a significant part of that end user community in society, right? So for an idea to be innovative, people are finding it useful. It's changing things, right? It's either changing a market, it's changing consumption, it's changing how businesses are operating, might be changing how healthcare operates. So that change is going to require that you're doing something different. That's almost an essential requirement of innovation. There has to be something different that's causing that change to happen. Okay, so that is an essential condition of what you must do. The other one I mentioned, discussing you and your team. If you don't have a team yet, that's fine. but discuss why you are the perfect person to pull this idea off. What is it about your background? What is it about your research? What is it about your interests or maybe past accomplishments? If you do have a team, you do want to discuss why they add to the appropriate group that you put together to see this idea through. So why, again, is this the perfect team to push this idea forward and be successful in launching a potential solution to the problem you've identified? Okay, and then finally, I talked about this in the elevator pitch. Try to tailor your presentation to your audience and objective. So again, what is your goal or ask? Okay, so those are the things you should try to do. I don't want to be negative here or too negative, but try not to do this. And these are examples of mistakes that we often make in entrepreneurship and startups and new business ideas. So the first one, and again, we all fall into this trap, I think, of founders because we're creators, right? We get excited about those things we're creating. Try not to only talk about your product or solution. Now, I'm going to speak from experience. When I first started to present and pitch, I would get very excited about my product, and most of the presentation would be about the product. Okay, you will notice in that presentation there's one slide for solution. Again, if you want to build that out a little bit and maybe show example, let's say user interface screenshots, let's say from a prototype you developed for a software application. If you want to show some of the technology you've developed or how it might work, that's fine. But that's only one component of your presentation. Okay, so try not to spend all of your time on your product or solution. Okay, second point, we all want to believe that we have no competition. So our natural inclination as founders and entrepreneurs and those who are creating something new and solving problems is that we do not have competition. That's almost never the case. Even if you don't have competitors in an economic sense, you do have competition. And the competition is the status quo. That is, people sometimes are uncomfortable trying new things. So we do not want to claim that we do not have competition. Rather, we want to look at who the competitors are and be very clear that we've done that analysis to understand what competition we're going to face. So these would be roadblocks, right? These are challenges we have to overcome in order to get acceptance among our target market to use our product or service. And there's one other point I want to make here about competition. When you begin to, present your idea, it's actually very positive if you can show you have competitors. And this goes back to demand in that aspect of the market. If you have competitors, it shows that people are already trying to solve, right? Companies or groups or businesses or nonprofits are already trying to solve that problem. So you've established there's demand in this market. That really is a concern to investors and other groups who may want to support you. How do we know your idea is going to be used? Well, if you have competitors, that's proof, right? There are others who are already trying to solve this problem. Now what you need to show is how you're different and better than that competition. And that's why that differentiation is so important within your presentation. Okay, so there will be competition. Begin to think about what your competition looks like, even if it is just the status quo. Okay, next point to consider. It's very natural for us as founders to think we're going to capture 1% of the market. And if it's a large market, let's say it's a $10 billion market, we're going to capture 1%, and that's a pretty darn big number. So we do not really want to use that modeling to look at the potential of our idea. And this gets into modeling a little bit, which I won't dig into too deeply here. But try not to say you're going to capture 1% of the market. That's, again, a mistake that I've made in the past. That, if you're new to this financial modeling aspect and beginning to look at market potential, it's an easy way to think, well, there's a big market. We're not going to capture much, but we'll just get 1%. And even 1% is a pretty big number. We want to do this using a bottom-up approach and begin to look at, well, how many sales will we have over time? And by the end of 3 years or 5 years, well, we might capture, let's say, 7% of the market. We probably do not want to say we're going to capture 60% of the market. Then we're getting into an area where it's very challenging to capture that percentage of the market, unless you're in an electronic health record space and you're Epic, but that's a different creature entirely. So 1%, try to stay away from that. 6-7% is fine, but then have a model that's supporting that using a bottom-up approach. So how are you growing over time? How many sales are you generating month by month during your first 3 or 5 years of operation? Then that will give you a percentage, and those are the numbers you'd want to include within your presentation. Okay, final point. We're sharing some templates here, and we're sharing some models. I think it's very easy to go through the motions and just kind of fit, different responses and ideas into the templates that are being provided. And you'll find others, on the internet, and you'll have other examples of templates you can use. The challenge is to connect your idea and how to support your idea using these templates and these models that are being provided. Let me give you an example. When you talk about marketing and go-to-market is very simple, right? How do you get this product or solution into the hands of your end user, right? You're going to the market. When you begin to talk about marketing channels, you're going to come up with a list, right? And very often you'll see entrepreneurs say, well, I'm going to use social media. Okay, if we leave it at social media, we're just going through the motions, right? We haven't thought about how we're actually going to use social media to get awareness created, to get people excited about our idea, to get them aware of our idea. So now we really need to spend some time thinking through, right? And that's the term I'd rather use. Don't go through the motions of completing this, but think through how you're going to describe your problem, how you're going to describe your solution. What your marketing plan is going to look like. And again, going through the motions with the market you're going to capture, that's using 1%. Now you're just going through the motions of saying, well, I'm going to capture. We need to put a little bit of time thinking about how we're going to capture that market, who that end user is going to be, why they're going to find our solution valuable, why we think we're going to grow the way we do. And that takes time to develop those models. And we all realize models, they're not going to be a true depiction of the future, but we need to begin to understand what the potential might be. And that, again, is putting time into thinking through each of these aspects of the slides. Okay, so that's kind of the overview of your presentation and the core elements that you should include. What I'd like to end with, and I'll just take a few minutes on this, is just going through how Airbnb used this model to raise their funding. This is back, I believe, it's 2008, 2009. Small company, no one had heard of them yet, and they had to follow the process that we all have to follow, right, as we're launching a new idea and trying to solve a problem. So before I do that, let me make sure, Leidy, that we have time for me to do this. So it would take about 5 minutes. And then also I'll just stop and see if there are any questions so far.
I think we're good on time. And I don't see any questions coming through, so we'll keep going and then hold some time at the end.
Okay, great. Okay, so I'm going to use Airbnb. And again, we're outside of our area of interest here with biotech and bioscience. But again, it's, I think, a good depiction of how to get these basic ideas across of, the components you should include within your presentation. Okay, let's begin here. Original name of Airbnb is Air Bed and Breakfast. So the idea behind this company to begin with was an airbed that would be set up by the host, and the host would also make breakfast for that person who was visiting their home. So Airbed and Breakfast. Now, before I go on, I have to tell you, this idea, when it was initially launched and pitched and presented, nobody thought this would be successful. Everything from the name to the idea to the concept, nobody would believe that this idea could possibly work, right? So this idea that you would book a room with a local and stay in their home and use an airbed, it was not supported, and they faced quite a bit of resistance as they tried to gain a little bit of support through their depiction of why they thought this would be successful. Okay, so that's why the presentation is so important. Right? The idea itself is ludicrous, right? If we think back, it's 2008, their idea is, well, you're going to invite a stranger in your home, they're going to spend the night there, and then they're going to pay you money. Okay, and I'm not making this up. If you go back and you listen to investors who passed on this idea, they will tell you the reason why we didn't invest in Airbnb, the idea just didn't make sense to us. None of it made sense. Nobody was doing it at the time. And by the way, I'm going to show you some counterexamples in a moment. This is why the deck's so important. Competition is so important. But they said no one's doing it at the time. This is very dangerous. There are legal implications here that they haven't thought through. It's just not going to work. All right. So quite often your idea is so different and so new, it's a little bit difficult making a connection with your audience to actually have something that could be valuable. Okay, that's the purpose of the presentation. We're taking your idea and we're adding some details and we're elaborating on this idea. So now it begins to make a little bit more sense in the mind of your audience. Okay, last point before I go on. They changed their name, they changed their focus. Everything about your idea is going to change as you move forward. That's just the nature of how entrepreneurship works. We're going to begin in a certain place, but there's going to be quite a bit of change that we need to expect and incorporate within this process that we're undertaking as we launch our idea. Okay, so they begin with problem. Now, in terms of Airbnb, the problem that they've identified is, number one, a price issue, right? So hotels are expensive. And the second problem they identified, hotels leave you disconnected from the city and its culture. Now, you'll notice here that second problem really isn't one you might identify today with Airbnb. That disconnection from the city, it's availability, it is price. Maybe there is a social interaction component that you do lack within a hotel. And then finally, in terms of their specific solution that you're going to get to in a room in a moment here, there's no easy way to book a room with a local. So even if you wanted to book a room with a local host, there really isn't a platform for that. Okay, so they're creating a little bit of tension, they're creating a little bit of anxiety, and now we as an audience, we would like this resolved. Okay, so next slide is a solution. We're all familiar with Airbnb, so a web platform where users can rent out their space to host travelers. Okay, and now we get a little bit into the value proposition and the unique selling proposition. So what does the solution allow us to do? Well, it allows the end user to save money when they're traveling. It allows the host to make money. So this is a two-sided market. And then again, we have that connection between the renter and the host community, allows for a sharing of culture that you may not get within that traditional hotel. Okay, next slide. You may not have this information yet, but if you do, what you're providing is evidence of demand and usefulness and utility, which means you're providing evidence of value. So here's what Airbnb did, which is very interesting. They had no market yet that they could share for their product. That is, they hadn't sold anything yet. They didn't have a product. What they began to do was look at what competitors were offering. Okay, I mentioned competition earlier. This is not their competition slide. We're going to get to that in a moment. This is a market validation slide showing that people potentially could use the solution if it were developed. Okay, so couchsurfing.com has over 500,000 users. Okay, notice a couple of things here. There's a typo in couchsurfing.com that did not prevent them from getting funded. Okay, so usually groups, they're looking for key elements and not really looking for whether or not this is something that could be published with an academic journal. Then they also included Craigslist. So Craigslist is providing validation that users are looking for the service, but now they're using something that's kind of clunky. There seems to be demand there. That's what they used as market validation. Okay, next, market size. Now, in terms of market size, this would be more tailored to venture capitalists, maybe angel investors. But again, this is giving us at least an indication of value. How many users are there? And then potentially, would that user base translate into revenue in the future? Okay, so they actually looked at trips booked as market size. So they did not look at revenue numbers necessarily. They're looking to begin with just at the number of travelers who are booking trips, right? So that is their target market. Okay, I'm going to spend just a little bit of time talking about some of the language here in case you haven't heard of this before, but they're beginning with the largest market available in the world, right? So worldwide, how many trips are booked? Well, 2 billion. Okay, the name for that is total available market, or TAM. So you will sometimes hear that term TAM or TAM. That's the total available market. That is, these are how many users are currently using a solution like the one we're proposing. Okay, now that number is ridiculously big, and the company, no matter who you are, you're never going to capture that market. What it's giving is your audience an indication of how big this problem is and how many people could benefit from your solution if you're to capture the entire market, which you never will. But that's why that number is included. Okay, next. Now we're going to become a little bit more realistic. And we're going to look now at a market that's within the niche that's been targeted by the startup. Okay, this is called the serviceable available market, or SAM, S-A-M, serviceable available market. So this might be the market in the United States. It could be regional. For Airbnb, it was budget users who also were online users. So that's how they took the 2 billion and crafted a more reasonable number. So out of that 2 billion, about half a billion, right? 560 million, they are budget conscious and they're also online users. That's the available market that we would like to service, again, called serviceable available market. Okay, even that's too big because there's no chance that any company is going to capture that entire market. So we need one more indication of market size. This is called serviceable obtainable market, or SOM. Okay, Airbnb referred to this as share of market. Well, this is the share of the market that this company expects to capture. 84 million trips, right? So 84 million trips per year, that's the size of the market that this company believes they can capture. So that's Air Bed and Breakfast. Okay, so that is the most important number because that shows what you believe you can capture within the market that you've identified. Okay, next, spend a little bit of time talking about product. Now, I've got to tell you, if you actually do a search for the Airbnb pitch deck, they include more examples of product than what I have here. And again, that's okay. We just do not want to fall into that trap of spending too much time on the actual solution or product. So they're just showing some screenshots. Like I mentioned earlier, you are a software company, this would be appropriate to include. If you're developing something that's more techy, maybe include examples of that. If you have a minimum viable product, you might include that. So the important point here is most of this deck and presentation does not deal with the product or solution. Okay, next slide. The business model. Now, as you begin to get to a point where you're trying to raise money, you do want to begin to consider the actual business side of your company, which means how are you going to make revenue? So in terms of Airbnb, they decided they would take a commission. Now, you may not be at a point where you've thought about revenue model, and that might not be something that's being considered, right, as part of your application process. But as you begin to think about supporting your business, this is going to help differentiate your company from others if you begin to think about how you're going to make money in the future. Okay, so now we're taking the 84 million trips that Airbnb defined as their serviceable obtainable market. You can see another typo here. There's a dollar sign in front of the 84 million. Okay, that was never found. That really wasn't a concern. We're more interested in the concepts, right? We're not going through the motions. We're actually doing the work necessary to show we have a valid idea here. 84 million trips, average fee is going to be $25. That's a 10% commission. That would then generate 2.1 billion by 2011, which was 3 years out, I believe. So this was a 3-year projection. And again, this is part of the financial model. This is not what they're projecting in 6 or 12 months. Rather, based on their bottom-up approach, right, they believe they could generate 2.1 billion based on their 10% commission, knowing that they would be able to capture about 84 million trips in about 3 years. Okay, so that's where that money is coming from. So business model, what are you going to charge? That's your price. How are you going to charge it? They're doing a commission. You may, just charge per unit sold. You may even make revenue by advertising, right? But that's part of what you're presenting as you begin to think of your business model. How many users are you going to target? That's your value. That then translates into revenue, the 2.1 billion in the case of Airbnb. Okay, now you can see why investors were a little bit skeptical and reluctant to invest. It's a very large, a significant revenue forecast for an idea that really hadn't been proven out before. Okay, now, obviously, Airbnb blew past that. They're worth many multiples of that right now. But at the beginning, again, this idea was so different, so unique, it was difficult for the founders to be accepted and to get support for their idea. Okay, adoption strategy. This would be the go-to-market. This is creating awareness, creating interest in the product. So I won't spend too much time on this. This will depend on your product, will depend on your solution. Could be conferences. You may get awareness through different publications. Could be journals. Again, this is where you definitely want to think through and be very specific about how you're going to create awareness and how your go-to-market strategy is going to help support your business. So you can see how specific they are. They're not just targeting events, they're going through the actual events that they're going to visit, right? So Oktoberfest, well, who are the partnerships that you're looking at as part of your business strategy? This would be business development, Kayak, Orbitz. Now, I don't believe they actually followed up on these partnerships, but that at least showed what their strategy was. Now, they did follow up on Craigslist, and this is one of the reasons why they became successful. They were able to post within Airbnb any post made in Craigslist. So that was a little bit of an engineering hack that they used. So a very specific adoption strategy where they really thought through how they were going to use marketing as part of their go-to-market. Okay, just a couple more slides here, and then I'll end. The important part about your competition, you have competition, right? So even Airbnb, when others were thinking, well, this idea is outlandish, what they're doing here is providing evidence that it's really not that crazy, right? There are some companies doing very similar things. Couchsurfing is doing a very similar type of offer. There's a bedandbreakfast.com. Okay, well, now this idea, it's at least becoming a little bit more tangible. If there are other companies providing a similar service, maybe the idea is something we can at least entertain, right? As those who might want to support you. And then, of course, we're all familiar with Orbitz and hotels.com. They're more expensive. So that is the differentiation. So Air Bed and Breakfast, a little bit more affordable and also online. Okay, and then again, differentiation. What are your competitive advantages? If you're developing something that is truly different and potentially innovative, maybe you are first to market. I would say that's not necessarily that important to be first to market. Most successful companies are sometimes third to market, sometimes 10th to market. It's all about execution. And again, this is why investors and others are so interested in your team, your business model and market size. They understand the idea is one thing, your product is one thing, but the execution becomes incredibly important. And some VCs go too far with this, and they will argue your idea is really worthless. It's all about your execution and team. I don't really buy into that. Your idea is very, very important. Your differentiation is very, very important, but it's not enough. And I think that's the point. If we try to put a percentage on this, your idea and solution, maybe 50%, and then your execution, which is your awareness, understanding market growth trends, that would also be 50%. In terms of developing a successful business. Okay, again, talking about your team, you do try to want to build a team as you begin to develop this idea further. Show that you're capable of inviting others to join your kind of idea and progression and development, and then also celebrate your successes that you've had in the past. Why are you the appropriate team to lead this idea in the future? So for Airbnb, you can see here, two of the original founders really have a background of software development. They were designers. They went to RISD in Rhode Island. So very strong design background. So, if you're an investor and you're a group who wants to support this team, you probably want more than that. And that's why they brought on a software developer. And you can see the software developer, it's not like he had, developed, an amazingly successful software platform in the past. But we do want to highlight experience of each of your team members, including yourself, within that area that you're working in. So in terms of Nathan, he had created Facebook apps, had done a number of different software products that at least lends, I guess, evidence that this team could be successful. Okay, finally, if you have any progress and traction, that includes press, could include surveys, any feedback, anything like that is appropriate to include within your deck. Now, these user testimonials here, again, I'm not sure how accurate these are. So you want to be accurate with your user testimonials. Surveys are a great way of getting user feedback about whether or not someone would entertain using your solution. And then finally, we have the ask. So for Airbnb, you can see this was very early on. They had not created their software yet. So they were asking for $500,000. That would get them 80,000 trips booked, which would generate $2 million of revenue over the next year, right? So over 12 months, that would be that return on investment, which is a 4 times return on that $500K investment. So they're thinking about the next step. And we can go back. What is the purpose of your presentation? You want to get to that next step. Now, it may not be gaining investment. You may not be pitching investors, but if you want to be part of a program, that might be your ask. What do you expect to accomplish with the funding? Okay, that's very important. How are you going to use this funding to get to that next stage of development? That would be entirely appropriate to include within your final slide and your ask. And then you're leaving in your audience's mind, again, you've thought about the next step of development. It's not just an idea. You're taking this idea and you're developing it further. So if you're asking for something, what is that deliverable? What's that tangible outcome? And this will be part of the planning that I know you're doing right now. What is that outcome that you plan to somehow create and support and get to and solidify if you were to get that funding or support from that group you're pitching to? Okay, so let me end there. We have the elevator pitch. We have the more, comprehensive pitch deck and presentation. Very visual, no more than 12 slides if you can help it. If you do add more slides, try to make them visual if possible. But the basic components of any presentation, really, it's that core that we covered. And if I could even break it down a little bit more, problem, solution, differentiation, and market. Problem, solution, differentiation, and market. Now, again, you want to bring your team in and why you're the right team and outcomes and all that good stuff. But that's crucial. The problem, your solution, your differentiation, and then market. And again, by market, who are the end users and how are you going to help those users solve a problem? That gets into value proposition, all that good stuff. But how are they going to benefit from you and your work that your team does to launch this idea and company? Okay, so I apologize. I went a little bit long there. But yeah, let's see if there are any questions that I can help answer.
Thanks so much, Eric. I think that your last point is something that I was going to ask, just because our project pitch sessions for the application are pretty short. They're about 10 minutes. So if you had to distill it down, what would you distill it down to? So thank you for preemptively asking my question. And I would just also remind folks that in the RFA, and I can send this back out again, the final page is a suggested pitch structure. And I would just reiterate Eric's earlier point that don't want to fall into the I don't want to say trap, but we want to not just focus the entire pitch on necessarily the product. There's quite a few items that's in the RFA for the pitch structure to cover in your project pitch session for this application specifically. And you'll see that most of the bullet points there are not necessarily specifics about the project. So again, thank you for emphasizing that. I know we don't have a ton of time, so I will stop talking and see if there are any questions.
Yeah, so this is Brent Leida speaking. So the REACH program, as I understand, is largely created to help support both innovation and development of some product or asset related to human health, either therapeutics, biotechnology, diagnostics, medical diagnostics, and so forth, which, unlike, let's say, compared to Airbnb, I think creates a much larger barrier, certainly for regulatory and also science and development than other technologies, such as, if, let's say, a website or some type of application or app that one might create for a phone or the computer. So we're looking at, developing a product could be between 5 to 10 years is more realistic for, especially considering biotechnology, medical technology. My other company, we've pitched to over 200 different venture capital firms and asset managers. And one of the questions we often get is, related within our pitch is related to return on investment. They want to know when they can expect to see some money back or some type of revenue generation in as early as possible. What would you recommend, in a pitch to address that, return on investment and exit strategy for those investors early on? Thanks.
Yeah, and first point, Brent, you're exactly right. We face right now in the startup community a challenge that we probably didn't face even 5 years ago. And right now, VCs and other investors want to see some amount of traction and evidence of moving forward and progression that they probably did not ask for previously. And that's just the nature of where we are in the startup world right now. So I don't know if that's fair for investors at this point to ask for that type of evidence, especially in biotech and bioscience. But it seems as if every sector now is now required to show some amount of traction that may not have been required 10 years ago. And part of it is a lot of the fallout, right, with some of those companies that have been invested in earlier. So first point is, there has to be something that we need to present to show that we've gone beyond idea stage. And that's where we can bring in market, we can bring in demand, we can bring in competitors. So if we go back to Airbnb, they had no product and they really had an outlandish idea. But what they showed was our competitors, number one, we're going to define our competitors, which is defining a market for us. There's something there, right? There's demand there. So that goes back to value as being determined by demand. So any evidence we can include within our presentation that there's demand, if I'm being honest, there's nothing else to entrepreneurship other than demand, right? We can develop innovative products or products that may become innovative. We can be creative and inventive. But if we're not responding to end need, it's going to be challenging for this business to be successful. And investors know that, right? Just from all their, even if they're not using that language, they have a sense that it's going to have to be that end user. And that's why they're asking for traction, right? And they're asking for users. So anything we can provide, even if we don't have a product and we don't have users, if they're competitors, let's include that. If there's a trend, right? I'll give you an example, and some of you may be working on something similar, but our company, Patient One, I mentioned them earlier, we started in patient education and patient engagement, patient experience. So taking informed consent forms, making those digital, very simple things, right? Which is what I liked about the company. As we were developing out our company, remote patient monitoring became a thing, right? And this happened maybe 2017, 2018. And then the big change was there was a new CPT code that was released and covered by Medicare. So now this is a different way for us to show potential value, right? There's a revenue stream associated with remote patient monitoring. So we began to focus on RPM and began to look at that as part of the value proposition we were creating. And that was something that was changing over time. Then competitors appeared, so you're beginning to establish demand. So that is, really what we have to begin to look to in terms of establishing what value we might be able to create in the market. There was a trend that was appearing within this market. We believe that trend would continue, which it has. So, that would be are you identifying a trend, and is that trend something that you can share with your audience and get them to accept? If we can get in now, we have a good chance of riding that wave, right? Riding that growth and that increase over time, even if it's not the case that we can develop our solution right now. So all of this is trying to reduce the skepticism and the reluctance that your audience might have in believing your ideas. So the more evidence we can provide, even if we're not able to provide the actual customer numbers, user database, and again, it's incredibly challenging in bioscience to provide that, but that's where, again, I think we bring in the demand aspect, the trend aspect, the problem, how big of a problem is this? And keep that in mind too. There's an emotional aspect to most presentations that gets overlooked. If you identify a problem that's affecting a significant number of end users who could benefit from a solution, that is as important as anything else, right? So if you can begin to tailor your discussion and conversation away from your product to the end user and someone who's suffering, right? We use that term pain point all the time, but Is there a group, a population, maybe a niche within a population that would benefit from your solution? If we can bring that part of the discussion in, now we're making that an emotional connection with our audience.
Sure, thanks. I guess, related is the how about addressing risks with development of biotechnology in a pitch? Because related to that return on investment, again, it's not going to be till 5-10 years out. How should we go about addressing the risks to those investors that they're certainly going to ask about? Besides just showing the market value, but the risk in general with failure of a technology along the way.
Yeah, and keep in mind, we're in a space now where failure is accepted, and it's part of the calculation, right, of whether or not to invest. So if we look at just the VC world, they understand and they're modeling their investment decisions based on the fact that maybe 10% of their investments are going to be even remotely successful. And maybe 1 out of 20 is going to be a potential billion-dollar company. So what they're looking for, again, is not just a solution. They're trying to guess and predict the future just as much as we are. So they're looking for hints, right? Is this a strong team? Do they have a background in this area? Have they done research in this area that they're proposing, funding for? Do they have a patent? Do they have other types of technology that supports this belief that I want to have that they could be successful? Is there a trend? Is there a market? So keep that in mind. Risk is part of this space we're dealing with. The other thing to keep in mind is we need to break down this 10-year period into stages of development and growth, right? Right now, if you're presenting to REACH, we need to present an argument that gets us to that objective. What is our objective now? Well, maybe it's a feasibility study, right? And we're achieving different steps that eventually will get us to that end goal we might have in 10 years. But we're not asking necessarily, unless we have a incredible technology, for $10 million right now or $50 million. Our ask right now might be, and I'm just throwing a number out, let's say we're pitching to VCs. It's a seed series company, which means we have a team, we have an idea, very similar to Airbnb, and we're asking for, let's say, $500,000. Okay, now for bioscience and biotech, that may not be anywhere near what you need to get a lab set up, right? And begin to do the types of research that are needed. But what would that get you, right? What would $500,000 get? Could you do some initial market research? Could you begin to develop some component of a solution? So it's breaking down that end objective, that solution into different stages of development, understanding what you need to get that next stage of development. And as you begin to reach those stages, even if it's a small step, you're also proving out that your team is capable of achieving that success and reaching that step and, getting that win. So then the argument later on becomes a little bit easier to make if you're asking for a little bit more investment to do something a little bit more significant. So depending on who your team is, where you are in terms of your research, your past experience, defining what it is you need to accomplish within the next 12 months. What could you accomplish, right? If it's a 10-year plan, lay that out, right? That's going to be part of your business model and business plan. What we need to accomplish in the next 12 months, let's say, is a very preliminary research study. We need 20, participants. We have our control group set up here, and we need $500,000 or $1 million to pull that off, right? Then we're going to provide some evidence about efficacy, and we can move on. You may have already done that, but that would be an idea of what can you do to break this down step by step to get to that next stage of development where you're moving toward that end objective, which may be a significant ask in the future.
Thanks so much,
Thank
Eric.
you.
Thanks, Brent. We've gone a little over time, so I want to give anybody the opportunity to jump if they need to. But Eric, are you okay if there's, maybe one more question?
Oh yeah, you bet.
Okay. Anyone else on the call have anything that they want to run by Eric? Noah, it looks like you're unmuted.
Yeah, I have a question because I'm reading through the RFA and it says we have 3 slides, correct? That is the
Yes.
minimum amount. Because I was going to ask a question about I mean, I'm in academia, so like sometimes you have supplemental slides, in case you're expecting a question to be asked, but that won't be allowed. So that's I think I read the RFA and answered my question, but I'm just kind of confirming
Yeah, yeah,
with you guys.
yeah, absolutely. Yep. Yeah, it is the 3 slides. Hence my appreciation for Eric to distill down, what are the
Sure.
main things to hit. So it'd be introducing your product and team, discussing the technology, and then the market potential. And again, it is 10 minutes, so I think a lot more of the pitches will be verbal.
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So
and with that said, usually 10 slides, you as a presenter can get through in 10 minutes without an issue. And usually the limit we give, we just had our Rafado Startup Challenge this spring at UM. We give our students 7 minutes to go through their 10 to 12 slides, and they usually get through that. And at the beginning, it may be 15 minutes, but we can usually get them down to 7 minutes. So the time should not be an issue. Those 3 slides will consolidate a little bit of what we've done here. So if we were to break it out, it may
Yeah.
actually be 10 slides, but I think 10 minutes is the right amount of time. That's about half the time that Guy Kawasaki recommends, but I think that's where we're trending now with presentations. 20 minutes is a long time to keep an audience's attention. So I think, 10 minutes is a sweet spot right now. And if you can include that material that gets into the problem, your solution, and then the market, again, that really is the core. If you can get into any traction that you've had, of course, that's kind of, additional, maybe that's, gravy, right? I guess we can use that analogy, but you don't need to include that. Again, most investors, they want to know there's a problem, solution, and then what is the market potential.
Thank you. And just as a reminder to you all, as you're thinking about this for Rocky Mountain Reach as a whole, the folks who are going to be attending the product pitches they'll have your full application. So they'll have access to all of the information that you provide there. So just thinking about the balance of that when we look at developing the pitch deck. All right, well, I'll stop us there and just remind folks that we do have office hours again tomorrow and Friday. So if you have any other questions, you can attend that, or I do have Eric's email. I don't know, Eric, if you'd be open to connecting with folks on any other questions they might have.
Yeah, you bet. And if I can help review any materials, feel free to ask me for that. But any questions you might have, absolutely. I don't have my contact information here. I apologize. Usually on the thank you page, you would have your contact information. Don't have that here, but Lydie, feel free to share any of that information. You can look me up on LinkedIn too. Happy to connect that way, but feel free to reach out directly to me. Yes, would be very happy to answer any questions you might have.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for all this information. It was really useful, and thank you all for your time again. And yeah, let us know if you have any other questions, via email or tomorrow or Friday at the office hours. All right. Thank you very much.
Yeah. Thanks, folks. Thanks, Lydie.
Thank you.